When I turned 18, I didn't come home to cake or presents. Instead, all my things were scattered outside, waiting for me like a final insult. I knocked and knocked, my fists growing numb against the door. Nothing, just glares through the blinds, tilted up like they couldn't stand the sight of me for another second. I'd always known they hated me, that I was just an expense, meds, psychologist visits, all the things they couldn't afford. Now I had proof, sitting right there on the curb. The doctors always told them it would get better, that I'd improve, but to them, I was just broken. My mom used to say there was no way I could have schizophrenia. It doesn't run in the family. They could never accept it, and to me, it was just who I was. I gathered up what little I had. No plans, no idea of where to go. Maybe I could get government assistance, but something else pulled at me, a need to escape, to wander until I found something. I didn't know what it would be, but somehow I knew I'd recognize it when I saw it. So I walked, never staying in one place for long, until I found it. An old rusted sign with faded letters that seemed to buzz under my gaze, like a jolt of electricity sparking through me. Welcome to Rosen, Virginia. I glanced at the crumpled paper map I'd been carrying. There was no Rosen, Virginia on it. Part of my mind screamed, "Turn back, leave this place, forget you ever saw it." But something about it felt right. The road leading into town was cracked and aged, each step drawing me deeper. Halfway in, the pavement gave way to cobblestone, rough and uneven beneath my feet. Questions raced through my mind, but somehow I felt destined to be here. I passed the sign and kept going, the trees around me shifting as I got closer. At first, the leaves only seemed to darken slightly. Then as I moved deeper, they turned black as pitch. To be honest, I thought my schizophrenia was playing tricks on me. I was wrong. As I stepped into the outskirts of town, an unexpected calm settled over me. It was quaint, quiet, a place untouched by the chaos of other towns. People moved leisurely along the streets, but nothing felt crowded or messy. And though I wasn't used to friendly faces, here everyone seemed warm. Even the ones who scowled or usually would have ignored me instead offered a nod or a polite smile. Then it hit me. There were no cars. Not even a gas station in sight, just quiet streets stretching through town, as if the place had been untouched by time. I reached what felt like the center of town and saw a building that seemed to belong there, nestled among the quiet streets. An old wooden sign hung outside, creaking gently in the breeze. McAllister's General Store. I slowly pushed open the door, a small bell ringing as I entered. I glanced at the crumpled paper map I'd been carrying. There was no Rosen, Virginia on it. Part of my mind screamed, "Turn back, leave this place, forget you ever saw it." But something about it felt right. The road leading into town was cracked and aged, each step drawing me deeper. Halfway in, the pavement gave way to cobblestone, rough and uneven beneath my feet. Questions raced through my mind, but somehow I felt destined to be here. I passed the sign and kept going, the trees around me shifting as I got closer. At first, the leaves only seemed to darken slightly. Then as I moved deeper, they turned black as pitch. To be honest, I thought my schizophrenia was playing tricks on me. I was wrong. As I stepped into the outskirts of town, an unexpected calm settled over me. It was quaint, quiet, a place untouched by the chaos of other towns. People moved leisurely along the streets, but nothing felt crowded or messy. And though I wasn't used to friendly faces, here everyone seemed warm. Even the ones who scowled or usually would have ignored me instead offered a nod or a polite smile. Then it hit me. There were no cars. Not even a gas station in sight, just quiet streets stretching through town, as if the place had been untouched by time. I reached what felt like the center of town and saw a building that seemed to belong there, nestled among the quiet streets. An old wooden sign hung outside, creaking gently in the breeze. McAllister's General Store. I slowly pushed open the door, a small bell ringing as I entered. "Welcome to... Oh, hon, are you okay? You look awful." The woman behind the counter gasped when she saw me. "Oh, thanks," I muttered, feeling a flush rise on my cheeks. "Yeah, I'm fine. Do you live in the town? I have a few "Let's get you cleaned up," she interrupted, her voice warm but firm. "I live above the store. There's a shower, and I can get you a change of clothes." She smiled, her hand gently resting on my shoulder, and before I could protest, she was already guiding me toward the staircase. There was no fighting her, and as much as I tried to resist, I couldn't help but notice how right she was. I was a mess, my hair tangled in knots, my clothes ripped and shredded, worn beyond recognition. I never really cared before. She opened the door and ushered me inside. The place was cozy, nothing like the worn exterior. It had a more rustic charm, warm and inviting in a way that felt strangely comforting. She left me in the living room, occasionally peeking her head around the corner to make sure I was still there. The sound of rushing water filled the space, and soon she returned, her hand gently guiding me toward the bathroom. "All right, I've got some clothes for you. I wasn't sure of your size, so I just estimated. The water's hot, take as long as you need. I'll be in the store when you're done." I wanted to say something, ask a dozen questions, but before I could stammer out even one, she had already closed the bathroom door behind her. I'd just met her, didn't even know her name, and yet she was being so kind, too kind. It felt off somehow. I spent what felt like forever in the shower, letting the hot water cascade over me. It had been so long since I'd had the luxury of something as simple as a shower. I almost wanted to cry. Halfway through, the pipes made a strange noise, and the water pressure dropped to a weak trickle. I stared up at the showerhead, my disappointment settling in. Then, without warning, the water turned black. A thick, viscous fluid leaked out, pooling around my feet. A cold shiver ran down my spine. The liquid was wrong. It didn't feel like anything I'd ever encountered before. I held my hands under the showerhead, the dark substance collecting in my palms. Everything inside me screamed to stop, to get out, to run, but something about it was mesmerizing. I shut my eyes tightly, hoping the feeling would pass. Then, just as quickly, the flow of water returned, washing the dark liquid away as though nothing had happened. I hadn't been managing my schizophrenia. I'd run out of meds a month ago, and now every strange thing felt like it could just be another episode. I convinced myself that's all it was, that the black water was a hallucination, that it wasn't real. It couldn't be real. I turned off the water, the finality of the action grounding me, and slipped into the first clean set of clothes I'd worn in what felt like forever. I stepped out of the apartment slowly, trying to avoid making any loud noises. My mind was running in circles, debating whether or not to mention the black liquid in the pipes. Would she think I was crazy? But then again, by all definitions, I was crazy. And maybe that's why I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I had no real proof of anything, only a mind that liked to play tricks on me. I slowly entered the shop. It was empty, except for her. She appeared to be in her late 30s, her straight black hair framing her face in a way that seemed almost too perfect. Her dress, it screamed religion in a way I couldn't quite place. Maybe it was just me, but it felt like something a very conservative Mormon woman would wear, plaid white and blue, the skirt falling all the way to her ankles. It was so different from the clothes she had set out for me. I couldn't help but wonder, whose clothes was I wearing? "Did you have a nice shower? You look so much better," she said, her smile wide, but there was something about it, too practiced. Like she'd given it 100 times before, each one a carefully placed mask over something else. I shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. "Yeah, thanks," I muttered, trying not to sound too defensive. Her smile widened even further, but there was something pitying in it. Like I was just another lost soul she had to fix. The way she looked at me made my skin crawl, like I was a broken thing. The bell on the door jingled and I looked over, half expecting someone else to walk in. But no one did. It was just us, just her. "You've been so kind," I said, trying to shift the focus away from her pity. "I don't even know your name." "Oh, I'm Esther McAllister," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "It's my pleasure to help, dear. You're so far from home I can only imagine how lost you must feel." Her words hit me like an accusation, as though she knew exactly what was going on in my head. I didn't respond right away, not sure how to take her words or if I even wanted to. Instead, I glanced around the shop, trying to distract myself from the weight of her stare. But everything in here seemed wrong. The shelves were too orderly, the air too still, like everything was frozen in time. And there it was again, the faintest, inexplicable feeling that something was off. "Oh yeah, is there an issue with the water here? It was all goopy for a second." I managed to sputter out, feeling frozen in place, my voice barely a whisper against the thick silence of the store. Esther's smile never faltered, but there was a subtle shift in her gaze when I asked. Something fleeting, a crack in her perfect facade. "Oh, don't mind that," she said easily, her tone too smooth. "I think it's because of the drilling they do up in the mountains. Sometimes it seeps into the water here. Our potable water is fine, though." I nodded, forcing myself to swallow the lump in my throat. Right, of course. So it actually happened, but still. My brain could have exaggerated it. I had to think logically, right? There was nothing unusual about this town, nothing that really stood out. Maybe I was just worn out. Or of course my mental state wasn't exactly the best. The longer I stayed, the more certain I became. I was fine. I was most likely safe. I could make it through this. "What is your name, hun? You look distressed. Can I get you some tea?" Her voice snapped me back into focus. "Magdalena. You can call me Lena. Tea. That sounds nice. Thank you." I offered a faint smile, but it quickly faded as my mind returned to the clothes. "Are these clothes yours? I don't mean any offense, but they don't look like something you'd wear." "Oh no, certainly not. Some of the ladies around town like to wear less traditional clothing, so I keep a few things available for them." She smiled as she walked toward the kitchenette, her hands moving with practiced ease as she began preparing the tea. "A traditional?" I echoed, my voice sharp with confusion. "Is this an Amish town? I noticed the lack of cars, but there's still electricity and running water." The words slipped out before I could stop them. My brain raced ahead of me, the pieces of this strange place not fitting together, not making sense. "Oh no, not Amish," she said with a light chuckle, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "This town is just different. It's a bit old-fashioned in some ways, but we've got all the modern conveniences. The lack of cars, well, that's more of a community choice. People here prefer to walk or bike, or use the old carts for short trips. Makes it feel peaceful, you know?" She continued with her task, the sound of the kettle boiling filling the silence between us. I could tell she was trying to make it sound simple, but the oddity of it all pressed down on me like a weight, something too heavy for me to ignore. It made sense in a way, it was logical, but why did it feel so wrong? I shifted uncomfortably, watching her hands move smoothly as she prepared the tea. The clink of the spoon against the cup was unnervingly sharp. "And the water, the black liquid, you said it was from drilling?" For a moment her hands froze, fingers hovering over the kettle handle. It was barely noticeable, but it was enough to make me swallow hard. She didn't meet my eyes, her gaze fixed on the teacup in front of her. The smile she gave was too wide, too forced. Yes, drilling up in the mountains," she replied quickly, her voice a little too smooth. "We have to be careful, of course, but it's not a big issue. It'll clear up eventually." She quickly picked up the kettle, the soft hiss of the steam rising sharply as she poured it into the teacup. The noise filled the room, almost too loud in the quiet, and I couldn't help but notice how perfectly calm she seemed, even in the face of something so unsettling. She steadily poured the cup of tea, her movements deliberate and smooth, then passed it over to me with a soft, almost maternal smile. The moment the warm liquid touched my lips, something inside me relaxed. A deep, unexpected calm settled over me, as if the lingering tension in my mind had simply been washed away. I took another sip, the gentle warmth spreading through me. It was subtle at first, but as I drank, the unease I'd carried since arriving here seemed to melt, leaving behind a strange sense of clarity. The black liquid in the pipes, the odd lack of cars, the unsettling familiarity of this place. It all made sense now. It didn't feel out of place anymore. Everything felt normal. I looked around the cozy room again, But this time, the old-fashioned decor seemed charming rather than outdated. The stillness of the town no longer seemed eerie, but peaceful. The tightness in my chest that had once made my skin crawl now felt like a distant memory. For the first time since I'd arrived, I felt like I belonged here, as if this town and I had always been one and the same. "Thank you," I said, a little surprised at how easy it was to smile back at her. "Are you planning on being here long? I could always use a hand around the shop." Esther's voice lingered in the air, soft and melodic, like a spell weaving through the room. Her offer felt natural, the warmth in her voice making it hard to resist. "I don't know right now," I admitted, sipping the tea slowly. It was more than just warmth. It settled deep into my bones, easing the tightness that had gripped me. "I like it here, but I'm not used to settling in one place for long." I looked around the shop again. The neat shelves, the way the light filtered through the windows, the soft creaks of the wooden floor, it all seemed so familiar, so right. It felt like a place I could stay forever. Her smile no longer felt like pity, but like genuine care, the kind you'd get from someone who had known you forever. It was unnerving in a way, how quickly it all happened, how quickly I felt like I belonged. "I understand," she said, moving to tidy up a stack of books on the counter. Her hands were graceful, almost delicate. "It can be hard to stay in one place, but sometimes a place finds you, whether you realize it or not." The words hung in the air, strange and haunting. A chill ran down my spine, but the warmth of the tea dulled it, pushing it down into the pit of my stomach. I couldn't tell if she was being cryptic on purpose or if I was overthinking things again. But either way, something about the way she spoke, the way she looked at me, made me feel like this place wasn't just a stop on my journey. It was something more, something I couldn't name. "Maybe you'll stay after all," she added, her voice so quiet it was almost as if she were talking to herself. I stayed. Of course I stayed. She offered me her guest bedroom and a job at the shop, and I couldn't resist. For months it felt like paradise. The routine became comforting. Waking up in the warm, familiar space above McAllister's general store, making tea with Esther, helping around the shop, learning more about the town, and listening to the locals as they stopped by. It was quiet here, peaceful, and everyone seemed so happy. I began to learn about the town's history. An old Christian town, deeply rooted in faith, but not like anything I'd been familiar with before. It wasn't Mormon, but some other denomination I couldn't quite place. There was always a subtle tension when the subject came up, as if it was a secret they weren't supposed to talk about too openly. But it was there, woven into every interaction, every prayer, every gathering. Esther kept asking me to come to one of the services. She spoke of the beauty in the rituals, how the sense of community was what made it so special. But no matter how many times she invited me, I couldn't bring myself to go. I had a weird relationship with religion, one that I didn't fully understand. My parents had been religious. At least, they'd tried to force it on me. I hated the hypocrisy, the way it was more about control than faith. The thought of sitting in a room full of people singing praises felt wrong. I would smile politely, thank her, but always make an excuse not to go. Esther never pushed too hard, but she always seemed disappointed when I declined. It made me wonder if my reluctance was the only thing that set me apart from the rest of the town. Everything else about Rosen felt perfect, though, too perfect. The people were kind, the pace of life was slow, and I hadn't had a single bad encounter since I arrived. But there was still something about this place that kept me on edge. At night, the town would grow quiet. The only sounds would be the chirping of crickets and the occasional creak of the old wood beneath my feet. In those moments, I could hear the whispers in my head, faint at first and then louder, almost as if someone was speaking directly to me. I tried to ignore them, telling myself it was just the isolation, or maybe just a side effect of my mind playing tricks on me after everything I'd been through. But the whispers never stopped. "Have you seen it?" he whispered, his voice hoarse, almost as if the words were being dragged from his throat. "Seen what?" I questioned, a flicker of panic rising in my chest. The man's eyes darted around the store, as if the walls themselves were closing in on him. I took a step back, unsure of how to respond. His words broke off as he began sobbing uncontrollably, his whole body shaking with fear. His sobs were raw, as though whatever he had seen was too much for him to process. I stood frozen for a moment, trying to make sense of what was happening, my heart racing. Before I could ask anything more, Esther appeared in the doorway, her expression shifting from concern to something more controlled. She moved swiftly, placing a gentle hand on the man's shoulder. "Come on now, let's get you somewhere safe," she said softly, but there was an edge to her tone that I hadn't heard before. She guided the man out of the store with surprising strength, her demeanor firm and unyielding despite her gentle words. I watched them go, my mind reeling. What had just happened? What had he seen? I turned to the counter, trying to calm my racing thoughts. But a sinking feeling settled in my stomach. The whole town had always been a little strange, but this was different. The man's terror was palpable, and whatever he had seen, whatever he was afraid of, wasn't something that could easily be dismissed. It all changed when the man from the lake walked in. He stumbled through the door, muttering to himself, his clothes soaked through as though he'd just crawled out of the water. His face was pale, his eyes wide with terror. As he approached the counter, he stopped and stared at me, his breath coming in quick, uneven gasps. "Welcome to McAllister's," I greeted him, trying to sound as cheerful as possible despite the unease creeping up my spine. He looked up at me with a look of pure horror, his face twisted almost in disbelief as he flopped his arms onto the counter like he was trying to steady himself. His hands trembled, and I noticed the fine sheen of sweat on his forehead. "Who was that?" I asked Esther, still unsettled by the man who had just stumbled into the store. I'd been in this town for 5 months now, and I thought I knew everyone. His sudden appearance felt like a crack in the veneer of the place. "Oh, him!" Esther waved it off with a slight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "He's just a bit troubled. Lives up by the lake, hardly comes into town. Best not to worry about him." "There's a lake." The words slipped out before I could stop them, my mind racing. I had never heard anything about a lake in the 5 months I'd been here, yet Esther seemed to freeze at the mention of it. She paused for a fraction too long, the smile faltering. "Yes, but please don't go there," she added, her voice tight, the warmth from before evaporating. I raised an eyebrow at Esther's sudden shift in demeanor. Her usual warmth seemed to tighten, like a thin veil over something darker. I couldn't help but feel that there was more to the lake than she was letting on. "Why? What's wrong with the lake?" I pressed, trying to gauge whether I was overthinking things or if there was genuinely something sinister going on. Esther hesitated, glancing away as if the answer was caught in her throat. She seemed to weigh her words carefully before speaking again, her voice dropping a little lower. "It's not a place you want to visit, trust me." Her smile, once so inviting, was now a little too strained. "It's just, people who live near there, they get strange. They're not like the rest of us." Her words hung in the air, heavy with something unsaid. I couldn't help but feel the chill creeping down my spine, and for the first time in months, the sense of unease returned full force. I couldn't let it go, though. Something about the lake had stirred something in me. The way she avoided my gaze, the way she was so insistent. It wasn't just the man's ramble. She gave a soft, dismissive laugh, but it was empty, like she was trying to convince herself more than me. "People talk about it," she said, "but they don't go there. It's just better left alone, okay?" Her eyes flicked toward the door, her shoulders tense as if she was expecting something or someone to come barging in. "Better left alone," I repeated, trying to make sense of her words. What had she meant by that? Was the lake dangerous, or was there something more to it? But before I could press her further, the atmosphere shifted once more. Esther quickly finished tidying up the counter, the conversation hanging between us like a cloud, thick and full of meaning. What was this lake?